So there's that. And okay, we, Barbara, are live.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for another Poison Pen Press author event. We have two wonderful authors this evening. The first one, Sara E Johnson, has written her third book, set in New Zealand with Alexa Glock, a forensic odontologist. I love that. It's such a cool word, called The Bone Track. And Sara and I have talked about this because we both hung out in the South Island of New Zealand, but I haven't been brave enough to walk the Milford Trick. I've driven it and I have cruised Milford Sound, but I never had well, maybe I'm just too old. Well, we'll worry about that later. Anyway, and Fred Weisel is the other author. The Silence Woman, his first book was wonderful. And this one, The Day He Left, equally so. It's a police procedural set in Santa Rosa, California. And reminds me of Ed McBain's wonderful 87th Precinct series. And earlier, Del Shannon wrote a wonderful series of police procedurals, generally headed by the LAPD, generally headed by Lieutenant Luis Mendoza. And the great thing about Fred's police procedurals and these others was they remind us that police don't just focus on one case. There may be a main case that drives the plot, but a police department can't just focus on a single crime. So Fred's very good at having separate lines of investigation and different members of the department doing things. It's a serious team effort. It seemed to me, Fred, that looking at some reviews and so forth, that's what people responded to, was this sense of teamwork. Is that your feeling?
Yes, I agree. There were a few reviews that said there's too many detectives, and I thought there's only 5, and but most of the people do enjoy that. They feel like they like the different personalities and the different skills.
Well, Alexa has a sort of more contentious, I think, arrangement between Alexa and some of law enforcement. But maybe at a moment when we seem to be unable to come together to do anything much, maybe the idea of a team that actually functions is a really terrific thing. So, Sara, were you interested to see that in peaceful New Zealand, they've actually been dealing with the same problem we had in Canada? You know, people.
Isn't that amazing? Yes, I was really surprised. I think the protests are taking place in Wellington, and they were, modeled after the Canadian protests, and that was very surprising to me.
Me too. I've spent quite a lot of
peaceful
time in
country generally.
Yeah, no, it really is. They've had some trouble with a couple of immigrant populations, and of course, there was always tension between the Maori and the incoming Europeans. But but they just have never seemed to me to be politically all that active. I wonder how much of it's just the pandemic has made everybody.
I think that's a lot of it. I really do, because their compliance with vaccination is extremely high. So I don't think it's the protesters saying they don't want to be vaccinated. I think it's everybody is just ready for this to be over and want a platform to act out.
Well, I think maybe there's some reaction against what the British called the nanny state. But, we'll see. I mean, we've gone from Omicron to war, so this has not been a particularly peaceful time. But it's nice to escape into crime, where we have some grasp at least on what's going on. So Santa Rosa, California, and Teano, New Zealand. What do you think they have in common? Fred, what do you see?
What do they have in common? Well, distinctive cultures, certainly. There's in both places. And I guess some wariness of outsiders in both places.
Right. Do you see them as kind of, more agricultural than industrial? I mean, they have a kind of connection to the land.
You mean in Santa Rosa?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's wine country. And so a lot of the land has been taken over by vineyards. It used to be orchards and apple orchards, and now it's predominantly vineyards. And there's a lot of controversy about vineyards, about how much water they use, the spraying that goes on. So it's not universally admired. I would say that, but yeah, that's the main culture.
Sarah?
Well, I'm not sure what Santa Rosa and the Milford Tract have in common, but I think two of the things that our books have in common are that yours is a wonderful police procedural, and mine is also a police procedural, but also a forensic procedural. And I think the other wonderful thing they have in common is their true escapism. You know, we've got a lot going on with the pandemic and now the war, and they're just both really great books to leave that behind and get wrapped up in a wonderful story.
Yeah, I agree. I really feel that one of the main things I do is storytelling, and apart from all the other mechanics and things that you worry about, I want it to be a good story. And
that's right.
I want people to get engaged in it and feel like they're having an enjoyable time when they're reading it. So that's really important.
Yes, me too. Me too. I will say one thing, since reading your book, I'm a much better listener to my husband.
Yes,
I'm paying much closer attention.
It's a killer portrait of a marriage gone stale that really, yes, you're right, Sarah. It's kind of a wake up call to all of us to nurture our relationships.
Yeah.
And not just husband and wife, but even the children, the whole family.
That's right.
Are basically strangers to each other in many respects. So when the father goes missing, which is why this book is called The Day He Left, it does begin to excavate into their separate lives and reveal things. Actually, I asked my question because I think, the landscape is so. If you have an urban setting, if you're doing a novel set in Manhattan or Los Angeles or something, there's a different landscape to the book than if you're in Santa Rosa, which is much more agricultural. Or I wasn't thinking of the Milford Tract so much as Teano, which I absolutely loved. I mean, I like it much better than Queenstown. It's so beautiful with the lake, and it's quieter, it's more peaceful. And one of the things that I remember, because we did go to Doubtful Sound years ago before, is how much work it is to go there. You had to take a bus to the lake, and then you had to take a steamer across the lake.
That's right.
And then there was a road with a dedicated bus that never left that took you from the lake to the top of Doubtful Sound, and then you got on the steamer in Doubtful Sound. It was like a 16-hour day.
I tried. I don't think getting to Milford Sound is quite that intensive, but it's pretty intense. And I tried to convey that at the beginning of the book, how hard it was to get there and how remote everybody is from anywhere, any civilization.
Well, I think what you conveyed in the book was how hard it was to get started walking the Milford Tract. There actually is a highway that goes to Milford Sound, so you can chicken out and just, which we did, drove, and then we got on the boat to spend the night on the Sound and all. But you did the same thing. You've got a lake.
That's
you take a bus and you have to get to the lake, and then you get to the start of the track. You don't just stroll down the highway and start walking the Milford Tract.
Barbara, do you remember that scary tunnel you have to go through to get to Milford Sound? That one-way tunnel? That was creepy.
And I remember the glowworms, which I thought you used really well in the book, because the glowworm caves are truly spectacular.
They are very magical.
So part of the point of this book, Sarah's book anyway, The Bone Track, is in fact hiking the Milford Tract from Teano across the lake and all the rest. And then on the track, and there's a helpful map, which I think is a really good idea. And we're actually in Lord of the Rings territory here. You know, some of the filming of the movie was
That's right.
well, a lot of it was, maybe all of it was in the South Island. Now that I think of it, was it? I think so.
Hobbitville is
You
in
can
the
go
North
visit.
Island. Hobbitville is
Well,
in the North Island.
okay, but you can go visit the Hobbit village from Queenstown, if I remember right.
Oh, is there another one?
I think so. Right. Well, whatever. All right. So let's try to be more coordinated. Fred, why don't you give us a brief synopsis? Sorry, I'm all over the place because I'm worried my internet's going to stop again. Why don't you give us a brief synopsis of the day he left, and then Sarah can, and then we maybe you guys can quiz each other.
Okay, sure. So this is the story of a school teacher, a middle school teacher, who gets up one morning, drives to work, and never arrives. And he's well respected. He's loved by his students.
Mhm.
He's married and has 2 teenage children. But when he disappears, his family doesn't know where he is. The school doesn't know where he is. And he leaves behind his phone, his lesson plans, and a disturbing photograph. And so that's how the story starts. The wife wakes up and discovers that he hasn't shown up at school, so she tries to find out from the son where he is. And then eventually she goes to the police and says, you know, it hasn't been that long, but I don't know where he is and I can't reach him. And so that's how the story starts. But I've noticed over the years that whenever there's a story in the news, particularly an accident or a crime, the investigation looks at the victim, but then they also bring in the family, the children, the parents, the siblings. And I wanted to look at how does something like a missing person case affect all the members of the family? And that's kind of the premise of the whole thing. That's how it starts.
Well, if there were any quibble I would have, it would be that generally nobody starts a missing person investigation for, I think it's 48 hours after an adult is reported missing. So how did you up the urgency so that they paid attention to it fairly quickly?
So actually, I read a textbook on missing persons, and most departments don't have any timeline anymore, particularly small children and the elderly. So I did talk to a retired police officer who said they might not have investigated as quickly as you showed, but I think the wife expresses enough concern and urgency that they feel like they should look into it. But that was always, you know, a problem, and I had to do things like have him leave his phone behind so he couldn't be tracked, like that. There were a few details that I had to use to make it more believable and authentic.
Well, you had to make it more alarming, leaving his phone and all the rest of it. Also, didn't he go off dressed unusually? Doesn't he have on like a tie and whatever?
Yeah, he was wearing a necktie and a jacket, which he never did before, and his son witnessed him crying. And I think that was another disturbing factor there. And so the police started looking right away. Yeah.
Great. Well, we'll come back to the other characters, but Sarah, tell us how this is your 3rd book. First one was in Rotorua, The Molten Mud Murders, a title I still like, despite.
I know.
And then the second one, we went to Stewart Island, where there are, you know, shark cages and shark diving and so forth. So now we're in the South Island at the Milford Track. You're touring us around New Zealand, aren't you?
That's great. Yes. All these wonderful places. But what happens at the beginning of the Bone Track is Alexa is working another case, and her brother is coming to visit from North Carolina. And she's excited about seeing her brother, but they're not really close. And she's a little nervous about hosting him. So they stop on the way to the backpacking trip because, and this was a true story in New Zealand, when they were building a road, they found several 12 caskets or so. And so Alexa is called in. She's an odontologist. She's called in to examine the teeth of the bodies that have been discovered. And she decides that they, because of the flat planes on the molars, that they were Maori of a certain time frame, and this wasn't a crime or anything. But a Maori elder who's there tells her that looking at the bones could unleash danger. And Alexa's like, oh, that's okay, I'll take the chance. But it seems to certainly be foretelling for the rest of the book that they do encounter a lot of danger. The first thing that happens is there's a landslide, and nobody is killed in the landslide, but it does unearth some bones, and that's how the book starts. Alexa sees this hand, and she basically excavates part of the skeleton and gets separated from other people. And by the time she finally gets to one of the lodges that night, another hiker, one of the luxury hikers, my husband and I did the Milford Track, and we were independent hikers. And you can also do it as luxury hikers and pay money and have a guide, and somebody carries your pack and feeds you. But anyway, one of the Lux hikers has gone missing. So all of a sudden, Alexa is in the middle of two cases, one that turns out to be a cold case, one that's a current case. And it's very much like a locked room mystery. And meanwhile, I guess the subplot is her development, her relationship with her brother. And
yes,
so I think
which is it's an interesting relationship. He's got some baggage of his own that he brings on the trip.
That's right.
And then there's her ongoing and somewhat contentious relationship with the policeman, Bruce
That's
Horner.
right.
First, we met in Rotorua, but Alexa's transferred to Auckland and to keep her work visa. And now, happily, Bruce, now divorced, has also moved to Auckland. What a surprise! So you got to have fun with that, didn't you?
I am having fun with that. I really kind of wanted to leave things as they were, but Diane DeBassier, my editor, said, you need to move things forward with Bruce a little bit. So I did at the end of the book.
Right. Then let's see, Fred, we have at least two other characters. Well, there are five on the team. Eden, I think, is a really interesting woman.
Me too.
Why don't you, she appears in The Silent Woman, and why don't you tell us what's going on with her?
So yeah, she's a young detective. In The Silenced Women, she came from the FBI, and she had to learn all the techniques of this department. But she's also, to me, she's the most fun to write. She's a smart young woman in a male culture, and I always look forward to her scenes and her dialogue. In this second book, the FBI comes back and kind of forces her back into that case she was working on that haunted her, that she didn't want to work on. And so she's dragged back into it. I won't spoil anything here, but that also takes up part of her time and part of her energy or psychic energy in the story.
Well, the case that she was working for the FBI was so exhausting and terrible that it almost caused her to break down, right? Isn't that why she's in Santa Rosa instead of hanging out at FBI headquarters?
Really trying to get away from it, get away from the FBI, and get away from the case. And it's a series of killings of women on this particular highway that goes across the United States. And she had worked on some very good evidence. The FBI kind of drags her back to help because they have a suspect in mind, and so she gets pulled back into it.
So it's Highway 60, right? Isn't there a real life serial killer that was case that involved work? Was it? I'm trying to remember. Years ago, what was her name? O'Connell. wrote a serial killer book that was all about Route 66.
Oh,
It went along from Chicago to Los Angeles. It wasn't a real case, but I mean, it was the spine of the book was that. And isn't there a trucker, a serial killer trucker that they caught?
yeah.
So.
I mean, I just made up this whole thing, but
Right.
I'm sure there could be cases that are very similar to it. Yeah.
I just think it's interesting the way we always have to name serial killers or, give them some sort of identity, whether it's the Highway 60 serial killer or, whatever.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know, do we have to name monsters, do you think?
Right.
I mean, there's some real interesting questions there, which I had thought about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Sarah, how about you did tell us, but there's a prologue, which we didn't mention to your book. So we know that somebody from page 1, we know that there is a woman who has probably met her end, but we don't know who she is and we don't know why. So as we're going along the Milford Trek, are we waiting thanks to the prologue? Are we braced and waiting? Or
I definitely hope the reader is. I tell you, those swing bridges on the Milford Track, they're terrifying. So I just knew that I had to bring those swing bridges into the book. And
I thought you did a great job of describing those bridges. I could feel that I have a great fear of heights. And so especially, well, I won't spoil it, but there's one scene that's very frightening.
Yeah. No, I think Alexa does too. And it takes all her courage to go across those bridges. And one of the, when I was doing research, one of those bridges that I found that I was doing some research is some French hikers were hiking across one of these bridges, not in the Milford Sound, but it just flipped. And it flipped them all into the water, and they all lived. But I thought, well, just the landscape of the Milford Track is so ripe for things to go wrong and for the indifference of nature to rear its ugly head. So that was really fun to bring out those aspects in my writing in the book.
Isn't nature the worst enemy in this book?
Sure.
I mean, I think that, the terrible storms, there are landslides, there, a trip that could be fairly peaceful is made horrific by the weather.
Exactly. The rain, etc. Really makes it treacherous.
So what would you like to ask each other? Fred, why don't I back off here and you quiz Sarah and vice versa?
Yeah, I'm interested in, well, first of all, is there a 4th book plan? Do you have a future for Alexa?
I do. The 4th book, I got out the Bone Track today and started reading through it again. So it was fresh in my mind, but I have a contract for 3 more books, and I'm halfway through the 4th book, and it's set. I don't know, Barbara, if you ever made it to Cape Kidnappers and the Gannett Colony, but it's set in Cape Kidnappers. So Alexa will stay in New Zealand for sure, for 3 more books at least.
Okay. And so have you gone back to New Zealand since your first?
No, it's been a long time now, 7 or 8 years since we've been there. And, actually we were planning to go back this past year. And of course, we were not able to. So we both, my husband and I, hope to get back there. I don't know that I'd be doing some more, all the hiking we did before, but anyway, it'd be great to go back and visit New Zealand again. I'm working currently with a forensic pathologist in New Zealand, and she's been such a big help.
Oh, good.
Because just in case somebody hasn't read the books, they are forensic mysteries. So there's a lot of forensic science in the books that I think is so cool.
Yeah.
In fact, I like some of the forensics in your book, Fred.
Good.
I won't mention specifically, but very interesting. I think that's with Eden as well.
That's right. Yeah. Well, in your book, I noticed you've handled it very nicely so that you get enough scientific information, but it doesn't clog up the plot and it doesn't slow things down. And I really appreciate that. I think sometimes, Dan Brown's books, some of those, they have so much historical information that it kind of sidelines the story.
Yeah.
Yours keep moving, but they give us enough of the sense of the forensic information that it feels real, it feels authentic.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. I think what I admired so much about your book is your character development. I mean, you have 5 people on the team, but I feel like I know I could picture each one, and so I'm wondering how you do that so well, how you're able to open up and let the reader get to know all these characters.
Well, it's a juggling act. I mean, I do have to balance how much time I spend with each one. But one of the things I've done more so with the second book is I'm learning how to do interior monologue. And so that's their thought processes. And I'm finding that if I can write that for each character, you get to know more about them, the way they think. It gives a kind of a voice to each one because it's the way they're thinking. Or in this book, they are interviewing members of this family. And I thought, what would they be thinking about when they're interviewing the children and the wife and the brother? And I thought they would think about their own family. They would think about their fathers and mothers and their children. And so that provides some complexity and depth to the characters of the detectives. Because then you learn about Eddie's father and mother, Eden's parents, who are strict New England parents, and even Frames's father. And so I think that interior monologue has really helped me to do that.
One of the things I loved about it, is it Frames that sees a psychologist?
No, it's Eddie Mahler.
Eddie, and I love those. I love when you switch to the dialogue between him and the psychologist. I just think that's brilliantly done. And so I tried it with my 4th book. Okay. And it's anyway, it didn't go over well with my writing group, but I'm going to work on it because I thought it was just a great idea.
Well, I'll tell you, that was a complete accident. I decided I wanted him to be in therapy, and I wanted to repeat some of what happened in therapy. So in my notes, I wrote that dialogue where it's the therapist's name and his name, and all that is speak like a play, like a short little play. And I had them in my notes, and I cut and pasted them into a draft. And then, I thought I'll fix that later. It's just a placeholder. And then as I was reading the drafts, I thought, what? It works. It's just,
it really does.
Yeah, it's just he's talking to someone and he thinks in his mind, he remembers it. And so it's a little short thing.
Yeah.
I'm curious about why your writers group didn't like that. Did they feel like it interrupted the flow?
Well, of course, I didn't do it. Anything. It wasn't a psychologist. It was Alexa is going to meet Bruce's daughters in the 4th book. And so she rehearses a conversation with them and sort of like the psychologist and your character. And they just didn't think it fit. But
okay.
No, I'm going to keep playing with it.
Good.
So let me know when book 4 comes out. Let me know what you think.
Okay, I will. Yeah.
So I
love learning from other writers, and that's like I say, what I'm learning from you is to have Alexa think more, have more internal dialogue, so my readers can get to know her better.
Okay.
Each of you has given your character a physical handicap. Actually, Fred's book, The Silenced Women, one of the reasons that I acquired it was because of Eddie Maher's particular physical problem. It's one that both my daughters suffer from, and it actually plays into the plot. It plays into the resolution of the plot. So why did you decide, why didn't you tell us what it is, Fred, and how you're going to deal with it? Because it wouldn't go away.
Yeah, so it's severe migraines, and I had them for years. So I was able to describe them very well. I suffered from them. And I just thought it would be a different thing for a detective. You know, so many of these detectives, it's alcoholism or divorce or something else. And I hadn't read one before with that. And then you're right, I thought it would affect his ability to visualize and to think through what was happening. And so I liked that. In the second book, he's able to deal with them through medication and therapy. And they are lessening, but he still has them. And I think there's at least one scene where he has a headache. But yeah, and I did a lot of research on the hallucinations. I didn't have one of those myself, so I did a lot of research on that to understand how they worked.
And Sara, you, in all three of your books, what happened to Alexa is an important part of her persona. Maybe one of the reasons has attachment issues and she's quite combative. Why don't you describe all that to us?
Yeah, so that's right. So, in writing the first book, and I think it might have even been you, Barbara, that said, let's flesh out Alexa a little bit more. And so Alexa suffered a burn when she was 13 with boiling water. And she blames her stepmother for this. And it has made her not open up to people. And it's kind of strange when you have, it's not even a disability. It's just a scarring, an ugly scar on her back. But she holds it to her, and it makes her closed off and not open up to other people as well, and have trust issues. And I think she worked through it a bit in book 3. So that I'm finding with book 4, it's not nearly as big a deal to her. She's finally kind of come to grips with this is who I am, and I'm okay with it.
Well, it did cause her, if I remember right, it does cause her some physical pain, occasionally.
And that's why she does yoga and runs, because she eats like a horse, but she does it to keep the scar tissue from tightening. And
she does have both of them have an ongoing physical issue, even if you are able to make it recede some so that it doesn't take over the books and interfere with the plots. And
it's interesting because they're both physical. People can't see them. Other people can't see them. So that makes them interesting.
And there's a psychological component to it too. When you talk about therapy, it can be helpful for migraines, and certainly her, Alexa's early thoughts about her family, her resentment of her father for remarrying because her mother dies when she's only 6 from cancer, her resentment of her stepmother, and that plays into her conversations with her brother somewhat in this book, because he's come to visit her, and he's more accepting of Rita, the stepmother, than Alexa is. He doesn't have the same resentment, but also he wasn't hurt.
That's right. And he also witnessed the accident, and he's able to tell Alexa that the way it happened, the way it truly happened, which is kind of a surprise to her.
So what do you guys think about, your main characters kind of developing romance? Fred, you give Eddie just a hint here at the end of this book that he might have a successful second date.
I love that part.
Do you think in a series, do you think that readers expect some sort of, we're way past John D. McDonald, where Travis McGee reset, every single book. It was like a new woman in the whole bit. Do you think it's different now, Fred?
Yeah, I think so. I'm just, dipping my toes in this. I'm not quite sure
Mhm.
exactly what's going to happen in the third book. I've already written a chapter where Eden has a date, and
Ooh.
it's an interesting. Eden is very shy, and it'll be a very interesting relationship. He's a musician, a professional musician, and I'm having fun with that. And Eddie will continue with his relationship, but I haven't written much about romantic relationships, and so I did, Sarah, admire how you handled it in the third book, and how there was some back and forth with Bruce, that they had some arguments and there was tension there. So
Yeah.
I like that, and she's not a pushover in that relationship. I like that.
So, Sarah, one of the things that you've done so well in your books, and that I've had a lot of fun doing with you, is the Maori culture, the Maori tradition, respecting, which I think, as colonialism is fading and cultures are reclaiming their heritage more.
Yes.
In this book, it's the greenstone, and you do find it in the South Island. Tell us a bit about the greenstone and why it can be a financial windfall, but why is it sacred to the Maori?
It was sacred to the Maori. I'm not sure exactly. Not sure why it became sacred to the Maori, but it became sacred to the Maori, and about 20 years ago, the Crown turned over all the mining rights to the Maori. So only they can take it from the rivers in fjord land, and make art with it or sell it. And so that has certainly caused some tension with non-Maori people who, I think I explored that in the book, that they believe the rivers should belong to everyone, and they have as much right to the greenstone as the Maori. There's so many beautiful beliefs the Maori have that are just so rich and so fun to explore in my books. And I thought one of the, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I thought their beliefs in death come out in the book, and how someone is not at rest if they don't have a proper burial. And I really enjoyed exploring that in the book. And Alexa is able to help somebody, or especially somebody's family, come to peace in the book.
There's a kind of Navajo thing about that. It
That's
reminds me a bit of Tony Hillerman. And, the greenstone, there are various things, but it fills a bit of a role that jade can fill with china. I mean, it's makes beautiful jewelry.
It does.
And if you, when we were in Greenland, I can remember that we have laws in the United States now against bringing in ivory and so forth.
Right.
And so we were on a mixed group. And so some were Canadian and some were whatever it is. And we had to show our passports if we were going to buy anything in Greenland from any of the craft shops. And none of the Americans were allowed to buy any of the ivory carvings, the walrus and so forth, and other countries could. And, I have a friend in Alaska that I spend time with in Alaska too. Only the Alaska natives can do carving.
That's right.
With, it's, I think that the Maori are squarely, various of these native cultures are being protected now.
That's right. That's right.
Once exploited.
That's
also,
right.
It's an attempt to cut down on the ivory trade. I'm not sure exactly why the gemstone, I don't know if it's the stone itself or whether it's because it's sacred to the Maori and because it's something that they can boost their economy with. Maybe it's just an effort to protect that rather than thinking the stone itself has any particular property. I really don't know.
Yeah, yeah, no, I do believe they think it's imbued with, the kuru, the fern is supposed to be harmony and new beginnings,
Right.
and certainly there's a lot of beliefs in the way they carve the greenstone and what the figures mean with the carving.
I remember driving down the West Coast Highway in 2 or 3 small towns in the South Island. There would be a store where a Maori store where they were selling, greenstone jewelry and so forth. So anyway, it's an important part of, and
Yeah,
I was glad
yeah,
to see that you brought it out in this
yes,
book.
yes.
So
And
Fred,
I,
are you doing wine? I mean, we're in Santa Rosa, so there's no greenstone. What are you doing that's native to Santa Rosa?
So this next book is about the wine industry.
Oh,
oh,
good.
good.
Without giving anything away, a member of a wine family is killed, and so I'm gonna look at that whole part of the county. Several years ago, I spent a year writing press releases for wineries, and I learned a lot about the business. And there's a lot of family wineries and a lot of dysfunctional family wineries. And so there's a lot there
Yeah.
to talk about. And I'm going to bring in the wildfires. Santa Rosa has had some terrible wildfires in the last 5 years. And so I'm going to bring in that as part of the story.
I think you have to, because everything is so at risk. I remember all of this when I was an undergraduate. We used to go up to Napa, on a weekend and in the fall and sort of hang out with the wine. And it was very unsophisticated then. This is before, I mean, we're talking 1950s, so, a long time ago. And I've been interested to see that it's become more French, more cheese. I mean, because wine and cheese, we even have this in Arizona now, northern Arizona, up around Cottonwood and so forth, around Sedona, is becoming a wine belt. And inevitably, if there's wine, there's cheese. It's sort of a terroir thing, I think, that they go together.
Well, the other thing that's coming here is cannabis in a very big way. Cannabis, some people think, may actually become a higher revenue crop than grape.
Yeah.
So, but you're right. The wine industry is very formalized. It used to be when we first moved here 30 years ago, you could drive out to a winery and have a tasting, and sometimes the farmer or the winemaker would be there and talk to you. And now you have to pay in order to have a tasting, and some of them are actually quite expensive. So it's quite different, and there's not as much land that's as available to be newly farmed. A lot of it's already taken.
Well, that's true. And then you bring in the locavore restaurant business and the B&B business or the hotel business. It's become much more complicated than strictly agricultural.
Yeah.
Well, I can't wait to read that, Fred.
You haven't written about it, but Sarah, I remember on our first trip to New Zealand that we were driving along over on the Marlborough side, I think.
Yeah.
And all of the real estate was for vineyards. You could buy a hectare or a half hectare and so forth. And it was like, this big land grab for vineyard growing. But now the wine has become so ubiquitous that, as I understand it, the value of it, in many cases, there's an overproduction. It's like a glut.
Right.
And so it's not as profitable as it was. So that could be an interesting thing too, to bring in.
Yeah.
Yes, it could. I remember the Kiwis when we were there complaining that the wine in New Zealand, they paid more for it in New Zealand than we paid for the same bottle in the States.
Oh,
wow.
Just because I guess they could ship so much of it to the US, and Anyway, the
Well, you'll
Kiwis
be
didn't like
interested to
that.
know that is true of quinoa. You can't afford to buy quinoa in Peru because they ship it all here to the
Right,
United States as a
right.
health food thing. How fun if the two of you each wrote a wine book. You can do that.
Yeah.
That would be wonderful. So why don't we call Patrick up and see if he's gotten questions or comments or anything he'd like to contribute. Hello there.
Howdy. Let's see here. We do have a few questions. Let's see here. At least I thought we did. Okay. Linda, this goes back to an earlier part of the discussion. Linda wants to know, are the interior monologues included in the book, or are they separate character sketches?
Oh, no, they're included in the book. They're just part of the scene. Often the detectives will be interviewing someone and they'll just think of something and it'll be right at that moment. But it's just a way of including what a character is thinking about, not just the dialogue. They're not always included in mysteries. I mean, Barbara, you can probably talk about this. A lot of mysteries don't have that as much. I was very influenced by a writer named Kate Atkinson.
Oh, yeah.
British writer, and her interior monologues are just brilliant. I love reading her for that reason.
Well, Patrick probably knows more about that than I do. It depends on when you say mystery. Thrillers rarely have much in the way of internal monologue because the pacing has to be, so, but there's in noir, Patrick, isn't there often, a fair amount of that?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in psychological thrillers too, you can see a lot of that. I love Kate Atkinson. She's great.
I do too.
Yeah, case histories. And
One of the things I love about Fred is that Fred has a degree in Victorian literature from the University of Leicester in England, which might be 37 years old, but nonetheless seems like an interesting preparation for life as a crime writer. So what those Victorians could be pretty brutal.
Yeah, I did my thesis on Dickens and money 50 years ago, but I think I must have just imbued some of that, his love of storytelling. I never got a job as a teacher or professor, but it was a great experience to be there.
no more real questions. Well, there's an amusing one that you sometimes get, which is, okay, Susan wants to know, what three writers, living or dead, would they each like to meet?
You want to go first, Sarah?
Well, I'd probably like to sit down with Louise Penny and Margaret Atwood. And I'm really enjoying books by Ellie Griffiths lately. So that would be a great dinner party.
Good girl. Ellie Griffiths is one of my absolutely favorite writers. I think she is
I love
funny
her.
and interesting.
She is so funny.
And the archaeology, she's very good in her way, just as you are with odontology.
That's right. I mean,
although her two standalones
great.
that have nothing to do with archaeology are the ones that that many people have, the Postscript Murder, and I'm trying to remember the title of the other one I'm going by. Anyway, she was nominated for an Edgar for and I think those tend to be more literary and kind of fun. How about you, Fred?
I'd love to meet Tana French, Kate Atkinson, and Ian Rankin. You know, I met him at a book signing years ago, and he came to our small town, Santa Rosa, and did a reading. And I had intended to bring a local IPA as a gift, and at the last minute, I didn't do it. I always regretted that, and I'd love to just have a beer with Ian Rankin in a pub somewhere and talk to him.
Well, the good news is he has a book out in October, and it's certainly possible he will come visit us. So if he does, it's not that far from Santa Rosa to
I'll
Scottsdale.
come down.
What a great
You
guy.
know, he's absolutely as wonderful as you think. I mean, I've known him for 30 years. And he's always, isn't he, Patrick? He's been Ian all the way through. Nothing about him changes. I mean, he's just a wonderful, genuine, incredibly bright, fabulous guy.
Well, I'll come down in October then. That's
I'll let you know if we work it out.
Who would you like to meet, Barbara? I mean, obviously you've met all the living authors that one could meet, but how about three that are not living?
Oh, well, Georgette here would be my number one because, as you know, I love her both for, there goes my internet again. Can you hear me?
We can hear
Am
you.
I all right? I keep getting this flash that says it's unstable. I like her Regency romance, but she wrote some really interesting mysteries, which her husband, who was a high court judge, helped her plot. So I think that would be terrific. Maybe Anthony Trollope. I'm not a big Victorian, Fred, because I can't read dialect. I'm such a speed reader that I just can't cope with it. But Trollope didn't write dialect. So I think that would, if I were going to pal up with a Victorian writer, that would probably be it. Who else? That's a really good question.
It's fun.
I'm afraid to say any living writer. Just, like a quagmire I could step into right there. If I could bring one back, I would bring Elizabeth Peters back because she was absolutely the most wonderful character. And we lost her too soon. But I think her Amelia Peabody books and all, she wrote in several genres, and she was just remarkable. She was an actual Egyptian scholar. And then she kind of had fun with it in her Amelia Peabody series. So those are three I could certainly spend time with. How about you, Patrick?
I don't know. I mean, Shakespeare would be interesting. I mean,
You don't know who Shakespeare is. We're not sure.
I know. I don't know. I mean, James Joyce, of course, it would be fun to see what he was all about, I don't know. For mystery stuff, maybe Dashiell Hammett or Raymond Chandler, somebody like that. So many, though. I mean, there's so many interesting people. Dickens would be fun to meet.
Christopher Marlowe. I would love to know what happened to Christopher Marlowe. I'd like to have been there in the Deptford Tavern and figured it all out. There's so many scenarios. I think in many ways he's more interesting than Shakespeare. So I don't mean that he wrote better, but I think what we know about him is so interesting.
Right. I mean, Blake would be great. There's so many of those interesting eccentrics, Milton.
Do you know Rob Hart, the Paradox Hotel that you and I did an event for last Friday night?
Yeah.
Rob Hart developed this. It's a wonderful book, and it involves time travel becomes something you can do, like you're going to take a cruise. And there are strict rules for it. And there's a station where you embark and you can go back. I thought to myself, of course, part of the rules says you can't touch anything, you can't disturb anything, you can't alter time. You can only go as an observer. But I imagine so many of us would be absolutely fascinated to go back and say, what really happened.
Witness the Little Bighorn or something, see what really went down,
Well, witnesses to history, but I think also one of the rules is you can't come back and talk about it. So I'm not sure whatever, but I just thought it was a wonderful concept.
It is a good concept. Wow.
Indeed.
I do have one interesting question that I'm curious about too, for Sarah, which is, do the Maori these days presumably get tattoos in modern tattoo parlors, or is there still a traditional way that gets done? Or do you know?
Definitely in area that I'm working in now with my book, Hastings, has I think it's like 20% Maori, and they have Maori tattoo parlors that tattoo in the old way. And it's beautiful. The tattoos are they're just works of art.
Is it the chin or is it the lips, Sarah? That is
the women, it's the blue lips and a chin often, and men more their whole face.
right. But the women, I remember, I thought I saw a photo not long ago of a particularly elaborate chin tattoo.
And blue lips. Mm-hmm. In fact, my character from my first book that has the Maori tattoo, she's coming back in the fourth book. I'm excited to bring Kook back. Yes.
Very nice. Well, I want to thank you both for spending time with us this evening. It's really been a pleasure to see you. And I'm glad to know that you are progressing on with your series. Sarah mentioned she's got 3 more in the pipe. Fred, what are you doing? You're working on a 3rd book, so.
I'm working on a 3rd one, and actually I took a year off and wrote a non-mystery, a literary novel, and I'm now looking for an agent and a publisher for that.
Oh, that's right. You wrote to me about it. I'd forgotten.
Yeah, it's very different.
But now you're back to writing about the VCI, the Santa Rosa gang here?
Yeah, I'm working on the 3rd one for that. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, that's really good news.
Well, good luck. Good luck with the 3rd one, with the literary book, Fred. That's exciting.
Yeah, thank you.
It is. So let me remind you, because it's always nice to find an author early on, so you don't have to buy like 11 books, but with Fred, you only have to buy 2, The Silence Woman and The Day He Left. And while The Day He Left is a complete novel in and of itself, I would really recommend that you read The Silence Women first. It's not a big commitment. And I think you will find that they together are a richer read than if you read just The Day He Left separately. As for Sarah, I've loved all 3 of them. Molten Mud Murder was The Bones Remembers. That's the 2nd one.
That's right.
And now The Bone Track. And it's interesting to follow the arc. Yes, there's Molten Mud. It's interesting to follow the arc, but also, while we are starting to travel again, but Sarah does a wonderful job on taking you as a non-New Zealander into New Zealand and getting acquainted with the landscape and the culture. And anyway, they're a lot of fun to read as well.
That's great.
So, yep. Thank you very much for joining us. I hope you all enjoy your weekend. Good night, Patrick.
So much fun. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thanks everybody for tuning in.
All right.